So dear all, welcome to our second Big Ideas for Democracy lecture here at Brias. For those who are not familiar yet with this format, so the Big Ideas for Democracy lectures are a series of high-level lectures featuring our senior fellows who will share their big ideas on democratic challenges and on the future of democracy. The speaker will speak for about 45 minutes, and after that there's plenty of time for a Q&A with the audience. Today we are delighted to welcome Brija's senior fellow Marija Radoman, who is a sociologist and a research associate at the Institute for Sociological Research at the Faculty of Philosophy at the University of Belgrade, where she currently also serves as head of the institute. Dr. Radoman's work focuses on gender and queer studies, particularly on political values, social movements, and the relationship between social structures and everyday lived experiences. Her research is grounded in qualitative methodology and a multi-methods approach. Dr. Radoman earned her PhD in sociology from the University of Belgrade in 2019 with a dissertation on same-sex partnerships and has since held several international research fellowships. She is currently a member of the Young Academy for Cultures and Societies at the Freiburg Institute for Advanced Studies, where she participates in international collaborative research on emotions and social structures. Throughout her career, Dr. Radoman also actively combines research with public engagement and applied work. She has collaborated with activist groups and NGOs, worked as a media researcher for the Helsinki Committee for Human Rights in Serbia, and is also trained as a Gestalt psychotherapist. Moreover, she is co-editor of the edited volume on lesbian activism in the post-Yugoslav space, Sisterhood and Unity, published with Palgrave Macmillan, as well as the special issues on living between sex and gender in the Journal of Sociology and Researching Society During a Pandemic, Some Methodological Challenges and Solutions. She has also authored research on the values of secondary school students in Serbia, and today she will talk on the student movements in Serbia and the role of emotions in there. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Marija Radoman.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you all for the opportunity to talk about emotions and student protests in Serbia. This topic is relatively new to me, as is often the case. Intense social events tend to inspire research. So for me, studying social movements represents a shift from my earlier research, which was mostly focused on gender and queer studies and value orientations. Also, as research team, as sociologists, we realized that we simply had to be present in the field and study the protests as they unfolded. Here I'm referring to the team at the Institute for Sociological Research at the Faculty of Philosophy in Belgrade. More than a year ago, when we saw that the student protests that had started as a reaction to the collapse of the canopy at the railway station were developing into a serious social and political movement, it was already clear that something significant was happening. And this was visible in the student movement's infrastructure, its forms of organization based on direct democratic voting and assemblies, and in the way different faculties were connected and coordinated across the country. In a very short time, protests spread rapidly, and by the end of 2024, around 40 faculties had already been blocked. At that point, we neither knew nor could we have predicted that these protests would continue with such strong intensity and mass mobilization throughout the entire year of 2025, and that they would persist into this year as well. Students and citizens are still actively protesting, demanding justice, or more precisely, demanding a change in the authoritarian regime and early elections. So the topic of emotions also emerged quite spontaneously in the research, although we all, I think I can safely generalize here, experienced intense emotions both as citizens and as employees at the faculty, where students were among the first to organize and suspend classes and occupy the entire building as a form of protests. From today, and this is photo from the Faculty of Philosophy in Belgrade. And from today's perspective, it is interesting to remember how these emotions changed, how we all went through different emotional phases over the past year as the phases of the protests themselves changed. I will talk about this in the first part of the lecture. And at the very beginning, especially at the end of 2024, it was not yet so clear that emotions would become one of the key drivers influencing mass support and mobilization. Emotions became both means and ends within the protest movement. Because of this, I would say that studying emotions in this movement has a strong explanatory power. The question, however, is what the predictive power of this approach might be. More generally, this social movement could be studied from many different perspectives: resources, mobilization, political opportunities and context, or the analysis of symbols and rituals that mark the protests. For example, one research question that emerged not from theory but from practice concerned the use of national flags and religious symbols. What do these symbols mean in this context, especially when they're used by Gen Z? I'm mentioning these issues only to make it clear that this is not an ideologically homogeneous movement. And of course, I cannot cover all of these topics because the phenomenon itself is a complex. In this research, my main interest was to examine my initial hypothesis and research intuition that emotions are one of the key aspects of this movement and that they represent, so to speak, a good entry point into the topic. As you will see by the end of the presentation, I also have some dilemmas and open questions. As for terminology, I will use the terms movement and protest interchangeably, although I use term movement when referring to longer lasting and more organized activity. And yeah, you can see these are some facts about the dominant political, these are some facts about student movement and facts about the dominant political party. So the ruling party in Serbia is the Serbian Progressive Party, which has been in power since 2012. The current president is Aleksandar Vučić. Together with Tomislav Nikolić, Vučić left the Serbian Radical Party, led by Vojislav Šešelj, who was charged with war crimes during the 90s by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And then they co-founded Serbian Progressive Party in 2008. So the Serbian Progressive Party formed a government in 2012 together with Socialist Party of Serbia, which is also a party from the 90s and was then led by Slobodan Milošević. The leaders of these current parties are also known for their political roles during the 90s, which shows that Serbia's political system has not gone through a process of lustration. This is often visible in right-wing shifts and some historical revisionism, but I don't have time to talk about. This is just a short historical overview. So I will now move on to the context. So first of all, it's very difficult to sum up all these events because the political situation is highly dynamic. I observed the phases of the student movement's activity in relation to the behavior of the authorities and in relation to the actions of the student and civic movements, since these forms of action are interconnected. The moves of one side or the other influenced each other mutually. So the first phase was phase collective shock, trauma, and organizing. The collapse of canopy at city Novi Sad, at the railway station in Novi Sad on November 1st, 2024, caused a strong collective shock. During the first weeks, commemorative gatherings, we had some silent walks and spontaneous protests without clear political organization. And the main emotions back then were disbelief, grief, shock, fear, and anger. Citizens and students initially organized 14 minutes of silence as some kind of symbolic reaction to the canopy collapse and the death of 14 people. About 2 weeks later, another victim of the canopy collapse died, after which citizens started holding 15 minutes of silence instead. And these gatherings quickly spread across the country and were held daily at 11:52, the time of the accident, and at multiple locations in almost every city in Serbia. So, for example, we were standing in front of the building Faculty of Philosophy. It was almost every day. As information emerged through November about possible corruption in the station reconstruction, suspicious tenders, and institutional responsibility, and following the first attacks on students and professors during peaceful gatherings, the student protests began to mobilize. A turning point was the attack on students in front of the Faculty of Dramatic Arts in Belgrade, after which the faculty was blocked, sparking a wave of occupation across the country. And like I said, by the end of 2024, almost 40 faculties were under blockade. The protests quickly shifted from commemorative actions to anti-corruption demonstrations. At the same time, students began organizing through plenums, faculty blockades, and coordination between universities. Plenums are a form of student assemblies that operate on the principle of direct democracy without leaders. Each student has an equal right to participate and join working groups. Each plenum has its own decision-making and voting system. And while this form of political organization has existed at our faculties and in other countries in the region, in the student protest in Croatia, for example, it has never been used on such a large scale or developed so systematically as a protest tactic. In this phase, student protests and faculty occupation quickly spread across the country. By the end of the year, we had organized student movement. The most significant event symbolically marking the beginning of the strong movement was the large protest at Slavia Square on December 2022. And you can see, I'm not going to read all those, you can see student demands. Their demands were the request for the disclosure of the complete documentation on the reconstruction of the railway station Novi Sad, which is suspected to have been influenced by corruption and by political campaigns, ultimately led to the collapse of the canopy, which causes the death of 15 people. So I need to check my time. Okay. The second phase represents the peak of the protests during the mobilization stage. During this phase, the dominant tactics included blockades of major intersections, mass protests and demonstrations in front of the key institutions. During blockades and protests, students faced occasional attacks by hired thugs, as well as activists from the ruling SNS party, with one attack resulting in serious injuries caused by baseball bats. And in January, there were also serious violent attacks on students and citizens peacefully protesting through 15 minutes of silence, with cars drove into protesters, seriously injuring two female students. During this phase, a wide range of social groups joined the movement: professors, trade unions, IT sector, public sector employees, journalists, lawyers, opposition organizations, and other social groups, transforming the student protest into a broader civic mobilization. The level of public support is reflected in data from the CERTA organization. In February 2025, 64 of citizens supported anti-corruption protests in Serbia, while around 80% supported the majority of the students' demands. And regarding emotions, in this phase, we may have experienced the highest levels of energy, excitement, hope, optimism, along with a sense of unity in the fight against injustice and solidarity. In the phase 3, the most significant event marking the turning point between the second and the third phases was the protest held on March 15, which is probably the largest protest in recent Serbian history. From that moment, there was a shift in the regime's patterns of action toward an open and direct repressive approach against students and citizens. Although repression had been present earlier, after March 15, it escalated, especially in the summer of 2025, becoming more visible and frequent. I will skip this part. And in this phase, students adopted new tactics. In this phase, they explicitly demanded the calling of early parliamentary elections. So, like I said, the repression intensified. We had police interventions, mass arrests of students, court proceedings against activists, and national media campaigns delegitimizing the protests became more frequent. Many pressures were also applied to the universities themselves, including salary cuts, decrees some norms that paralyzed institutional functioning, and various threats to professors who are politically active. And major novelty of this phase was the emergence of citizens' assemblies. These are local self-organization through direct democracy, similar to student plenums. The assemblies indicated that the movement was becoming more decentralized and long-term. Also, I didn't mention this before, but in this phase, opposition parties became more active. The parliamentary opposition became more visible and engaged, and they also called for early elections. Regarding opposition parties, I mentioned that students didn't want to cooperate with them. One reason was strategic. Students knew that opposition parties are not very popular in the country, and people often see them as ineffective. Another reason was fear that these parties would take over their story and maybe disrupt the unity of the movement. And maybe they could discredit the student in the wider public. So. Phase 4, in this ongoing phase, we can see a strategic shift with students focusing mainly on demanding early parliamentary elections. Blockades at most faculties have ended, and the number of students participating in plenums has decreased, but citizens and students continue to organize in parallel. It is important to say that students are organizing the student list, essentially new political party or new political group that will represent students in the next elections. In this way, this is maybe some kind of tactic shift in student movement. They explained that they still believe in direct democracy at the plenum, but some thought that representative democracy was necessary for further organization. So that was the reason why they demanded early elections. The large gathering on November 1st, held on the anniversary of the tragedy, once again mobilized citizens and temporarily restored the energy of the movement. So in this last phase, this ongoing phase, the movement may be in a stage of stagnation in the conflict with no significant progress. And one of the key questions frequently raised concerns the broader significance of these protests. More specifically, the central political or social dilemma is whether students are demanding systemic change or simply the replacement of the current government. So my answer to that is if one focuses strictly on the movement's formal demands and goals, the answer may appear closer to the later. Yet if we analyze the broader struggle of students and citizens, it becomes evident that the movement reaches much deeper, and it has opened fundamental questions about functioning the society, from moral principles through structures of inequality and the relationship between institutions and citizens. And finally, the fact that the movement is led by young people may signal its strength, because it is driven by the very generation who will shape the future of the society. So now I will talk about student experiences and emotions within the student protests. I have time. First, some general notes. The study of emotions within social movement research is relatively new in scientific terms. It is really only since the 1990s that approaches have developed that look at emotions in protests without pathologizing or ignoring them. So contemporary research emphasizes approaches that treat emotions as equally important as structural perspectives in studying social movements, because social movements theory has traditionally emphasized rational interests, institutional structures, and material conditions as the main drivers of political engagement. But all emotions play a key role not only during the mobilization phase. They are, from analytical perspective, part of every stage and every aspect of a protest. Okay, I'm not going to read all this. I'm just going to. So the main research question in this, in my study, was which emotions were dominant in the students' narratives, and how did they function as driving force for the student movement and collective action. on this photo, you can see just a part of our research team during one protest. And the instrument, the questions in the interview focused on different topics, on participant motivation for joining the protests, their understanding of the principles of direct democracy and activism, their emotions, their attitudes toward politics, and their relationship to the movement's symbols. And the central question regarding emotions were which events or situations during the protests triggered the most intense emotions for you? Which of the following emotions have been dominant for you in the past few weeks? Anger, rage, pride, anxiety, gratitude, fear, solidarity, insecurity, enthusiasm, concern, optimism, and love. And the third question regarding emotion is, have these protests and your participation in them changed the way you perceive yourself? Like I mentioned, since December 2024, my colleagues and I have not only begun researching the student movement, we have become an integral part of it, spending days and hours alongside students, joining their actions and participating in the demonstrations. And it is interesting for me that the student protests have not only transformed our everyday lives, but also the way we conduct research. I think that the fieldwork was perhaps the most exciting part of this project. Personally, I feel as though these experiences has maybe pushed forward my own academic processes. I remember that I wrote in my notes back then, last year, that I no longer have the luxury of spending days in quiet contemplation. Now I work while simultaneously running to the next protest. And just as the students in this study describe how the protests have changed them, how they've become more open to others, I can say the same for myself. I have become maybe more active, more radical in every sense, both personally and politically. So, yeah. In this slide, you can see that I coded transcript of interviews. I coded the material in MaxQDA software. And you can see the distribution of emotions shows dominance of negative emotions, 34%, and then collective or relational emotions, 27%, compared to positive emotions, 20%. However, since this is only a statistical overview, overlaps between emotions are not visible here in this slide, because negative emotions are often transformed through process of emotional work into collective and relational emotions. So through qualitative analysis, we can conclude that collective emotions are perhaps the strongest in the students' narratives. This is also confirmed when we look at the individual codes. And you can see that here. Here we show, on the previous slide, we showed the total codes for emotion groups. But looking at the specific codes, experiences of support, unity, togetherness, and solidarity are dominant. So you can see the dominant subcodes within collective, negative and positive emotions. From the data, I would highlight that also anger and rage appear quite frequently, which is typical for protests. Anger is an important trigger because it closely linked to the feeling of injustice and motivates people to act. However, these relational subcodes, collective emotions, confirms collective pattern that the protests were deeply rooted in a sense of collective feeling, some shared we feeling. Students participated in the protests not only as individuals, but as members of a community. And separate category was bodily sensations, which usually refer to this description of exhaustion, tiredness, burnout, or crying from happiness, emotions connected to the body. So the interpretation of the findings is based on these concepts. The embodied experience of protests. This is maybe very, this is interesting part because I didn't have so much time to research this specific part, but I just recognize that through my data. The collective experience of being together in the same space generates emotions among students. Emotions are also embodied experiences, meaning that people respond not only to the emotional meaning of a situation, but also to the physically perceived experiences of others within a group. And recent studies suggest that emotional perception is not limited to cognitive interpretation, but involves bodily responses as well. For example, people often respond to others' tone of voice or facial expressions with matching bodily reactions, even without consciously imitating them. This suggests that emotions operate through multiple channels. They emerge from the interaction of voice, expressions, and bodily sensations. And in this way, group members can become emotionally tuned to one another on several levels at the same time. And also important concept is emotional work. Emotional work refers to the regulation and direction of emotions within a collective. Emotional framing, another important aspect, is refers to reframing of personal and collective experiences into a shared moral and political narrative. For example, students attached strategic meaning to their feelings, constructing interpretative frames that both motivated participation and sustained the movement's collective identity. So emotional work is an internal process in which people regulate their feelings. For example, students motivate themselves and others, turning sadness or fear into action. But they also create or use frames to explain why they act, build a sense of community, and actively inspire others to join the protests. And another important aspect is collective emotions, moral emotions, the most important aspect of this research. So collective emotions such as solidarity are one of the mechanisms that have a positive and motivating effect on movement members. And other authors explain that solidarity is closely linked to collective identity. Because all these shared and collective emotions help build the culture of the movement. Collective identity, I use a processual approach to collective identity developed by sociologist Alberto Mellucci. Collective identity is understood as a process shaped through interactions. So collective identity does not mean that everyone in a movement shares the same or completely clear goals. On the contrary, it often includes different conflicts and ideas about what the goals are, how to achieve them, and what the action actually means. So the movement usually bring together many different perspectives without full agreement among all members. So I believe that empirical data are I believe that empirical data are best understood through the concept of emotional work and emotional framing, because negative emotions such as sadness, grief, and anger, often triggered by a text on other students or colleagues, the grief over the death of 16 people or experiences of injustice, were actively transformed into a sense of struggle and solidarity against the regime. And I think that this process of emotional transformation, like I said, is maybe the crucial part of emotional work. It illustrates emotional work in practice, where participants consciously or unconsciously turned potentially paralyzing feelings into politically productive emotions. For example, a female student describes how her feelings shifted from anger, helplessness, and to a sense of belonging to a stronger generational community. She said, on the first day, I felt confused and scared, actually scared for the health of my colleagues who were targets of attacks. But I also felt angry, and in that initial period, we were, it seems to me, very angry. Then a certain enthusiasm took over when the blockade began, when some kind of order started to be established in the faculty building, when it became ours, when it became a kind of freedom we hadn't felt before. The space you usually enter, not that someone is torturing you, but where you are constantly subordinated, now you suddenly have a certain kind of control over the space and the freedom to use its resources, which for us was incredibly exciting, to use the building's resources freely and as much as we wanted. We immediately embraced that. So yes, I don't know, happy, excited. It really energized us. I don't know how to express it properly. The next female student describes how a sense of community and belonging formed within this generation. Somehow, I don't know, I just heard a comment that we are a generation that lost a lot of socialization because of COVID, and in a way, we made up for it here. These are really conditions where we all live together at the university, and we do things together, cleaning, planning, organizing, everything together, which is truly unique. We organize things together, plan with purpose. It really feels like being in a family. It was interesting to ask participants in the interviews whether they had in some way shaped their actions and responses to public expectations in order to gain support. This is just another photo. When asked this direct question, the answers were different, but they suggest that there was at least some level of strategy involved. As one female student explained, and these walks between cities, because students had that strategy of protest marching or walks between cities, these walks were actually organized as a kind of action meant to encourage people so that they would see us and support us. I think it helps them see who we are. These walks were truly crucial for connecting with citizens and building solidarity. In the media, people are often seen crying with many hugs. Students were welcomed as a symbol of freedom or change. And yeah, regarding, other students explain the same strategy on a different way. He said, everything else somehow came naturally. I have the feeling that people just recognized the sincerity in these student protests, the blockades, and simply felt the need to support something so pure, so natural. So regarding framing, my assumption is that in the early stages of the protest, much of it happened spontaneously. Although some things had to be strategically planned, of course. Students had media working groups and strategic groups at almost every faculty, which were responsible for planning future actions and media representation. So emotions were maybe used as some kind of tool. And later in the protests, I believe this happened even more often as students realized that mass mobilization depended on the emotional reactions of citizens, which often developed through direct contact with students walking from city to city, visiting rural areas, older people, and some places that no one else had visited. For example, it would be interesting if for someone to study the role of older people specifically, as they often appeared in students' promo videos and became kind of symbol connected generations. Okay. So to sum up, the collective experience of students sharing the same spaces through living together in occupied faculties, marching together, and engaging in embodied joint practices played a crucial role in shaping the emotions that emerged during the protests. These emotions, especially collective emotions and shared moral feelings and values, helped shape the movement and strengthen collective identity that was important for building the student movement. Throughout common practices, symbols, and organizational forms that emphasized opposition to authoritarian regime, students developed a strong sense of belonging, unity, shared goals, and solidarity that were not only an end in themselves, but were also used as a strategy to encourage others to join the protests and the broader collective struggle. So as a result, these experiences became formative for a new political generation, with emotion serving as the basis on which a collective student identity was built. And I also have some questions for the end. For example, what does, if we identify one political generation, for example, what does that generation tells us about its future? Is it possible to make predictions based on that? Yeah, that would be everything. Thank you for your attention.
If anyone wants to jump in the discussion, we have some room for questions now.
Thanks. Actually, I shouldn't have put my hand up so quickly because I haven't actually organised my questions properly. But they won't be tricky, I promise. Actually, I have three questions. Actually, one very basic, one will be very unexpected, I think. But so the first one is, why are you talking about emotions and not affects or passions? I'm genuinely interested. I know that I have actually started work on emotions and populism myself, but we're using the term passions. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested to know why you're using the term emotions and what comes with that. The second question, is I'm really interested in these moments of silence, actually. And from what I was hearing from your presentation, you are interested in how, or you've noticed how emotions are kind of transformed through the protest itself into other kinds of emotions, into kind of mobilization and collective identifications and so on. And I would see that perhaps in terms of performance and performativity. So I'm wondering what the silence does in relation to that specifically. So, or maybe you could just reflect more about these moments of silence, because I think that was super interesting. The third question, Sylvia mentioned in the introduction that you're a trained psychologist. I wondered how that impacted your research and whether you use those skills you had gained through your psychology training and in your fieldwork. Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you, Amanda. Yeah, there is difference between affects and emotions, because affects is a basic, immediate feeling state, and affects appear quickly and even without clear awareness. But emotions are more maybe complex experience that includes affects, but also thoughts and meanings. So I use term emotions because I focused on affects connected with meanings. I need those meanings if I want to build the theory. If I want to build the theory about collective emotions and moral values, and at the end to build a theory about collective identity. So, of course, for example, James Jasper, he referred to that we have different how short-run reflex emotions and long-standing affective emotions. So short-run emotions, reflexive emotions, for example, are anger or joy or now I can't remember more emotion, but long-standing shared emotions are, for example, solidarity or togetherness or the sense of unity, something like that. And I needed those collective emotions because I detected those emotions in interviews, and I needed those emotions for my theory. To explain the new generation, which is, by my opinion, based on these collective and relational emotions and new moral values. So I'm interested in your use of passions. Are passion similar to emotions, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that later. I don't.
Okay, later. And the second, yeah, you have two more questions. Silence was some kind of ritual. Yeah, you're right, and that is very interesting because I didn't have time to go to that topic as well, but it is very interesting because those rituals were repetitive. We were standing in silence for months, not just days. And yeah, they're very strong. Now I don't have videos about that, but we had, for example, the first protests at Slavia Square in Belgrade. We had those mass standing in silence for 15 minutes, and it was very I think those emotions really build that sense of unity between students and citizens, and that was also strategy, not just commemorative gathering, not just we are standing in grief. I think that is also strategy and a tool. And yeah, you asked me, the third question is actually complicated. I use my psychotherapy skills in this research, but also I use this research for my practice. So it was useful because I had clients who are asking me about how to cope with lots of feelings during protests, how to cope with violence. Because we really had those situations. You go to the protest, and at the next moment you don't know how to behave because maybe the police is going to attack you, and what to do in those situations. So I really needed to think about that, how to guide someone, how to give advice to someone, what to do in those situations. And I also needed to build those strategies for myself as well. How to protect myself, basically.
Thank you. And I forgot to say that it was a really interesting presentation. I learned a lot.
Thank you.
I suppose just to quickly come back on the populism and passion. So we're seeing... We're using the word passions because we're using the aspect of affect in its very political mode, and the way that affect, in a kind of Lacanian sense, works unconsciously to drive identification and coalition. So that's why it's interesting for populism. Whereas I would have seen emotion as kind of a more individual thing, but it's interesting the way you described it being more something you can...
collective. Shared.
Well, it's the way but it's from what you said, it was something that could be kind of labelled and named more clearly, right?
Yeah, because I needed. That was also a methodological question. You have some emotions that are explicit and some implicit. So I needed to choose how to code that material. I didn't code everything that was mixed because I didn't want to be subjective, to put my subjective interpretation on the data. So I use emotion to code those narratives who are explicit with some meanings and label and words.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I had a lot of methodological dilemmas, so I'm not so sure about everything. Those are open questions.
Yeah, I'm done. Okay. Thank you. Already a very interesting conversation going on here, and I will build on from that conversation. I'm Karen Seeles, and thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I'm very happy also to see that this is already studied. This protest in Serbia. I was in Sarajevo in May last year. So in the third phase, I was over there in Sarajevo talking about gender and in political science in southeastern Europe, and there were people also participating in the protest that attended that meeting, and I'm really happy to see that this is studied because it's an important mobilization that is going on there. I also came to the study of emotion in a similar way as you did. I guess, like, okay, we have to study emotions, otherwise many political phenomena simply don't make sense. So you miss a lot if you don't study emotions. So, which brought me to a very unexpected place. Now I'm in a political project together with many political psychologists. And we are studying grievance politics and grievance-related emotions in politics. And I'm part of the work package that is supposed to design emotion-sensitive democratic innovation that is actually would be geared towards actually designing for the kind of emotional evolutions that you see happening. And why do I make this big introduction? Because there is something, some interesting theory that I've learned from these political psychologists, and most importantly Mikko Salmela from Finland. And he explained to me, and he had to explain it to me at least 3 to 4 times before I thoroughly get it, was the concept of emotional mechanism. And so this is all about emotional transformations taking place, and in the course and the slipstream of the emotional transformation, also the self and the self-identity transforms. So so the 2 emotional mechanisms that are central in our theoretical framework are the emotional mechanism of resentment, ressentiment, and the emotional mechanism of, and this is ugly, EMSOS, the emotional mechanism of solidarity-oriented sharing. And that is exactly, I think, what you are studying. And of course, this is, and I think that is also a reason why this is so interesting research, because you describe it very well, how this emotional mechanism of solidarity-oriented sharing works. It starts with the same initial emotions that can also lead to anti-social, anti-democratic, hence I think the connection with populism outcomes. But these emotions, the same initial emotions, can be transformed through what you are describing. So this is hugely interesting research. So I was wondering, so my question, sorry for the long introduction, my question is actually, do you think that that would be possible to make this dynamic travel to more, democratic innovations broadly understood? Do you think that we can harvest these kind of pro-democratic mechanisms to democratic innovations? And then my second question, and I will shut up. What I find so intriguing is, why are universities very, very often the site of these kind of protests? This is very unique, what is happening now in Serbia, but when you look back, Vietnam protest, and now more recently also pro-Palestine Gaza protest, it's universities. And it's student, yes, but it's also the site where it's the site also. It's university buildings. And I was wondering whether you have any reflections on why there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you a lot. This is. I agree with what you say, that emotions often interact with each other constantly. So we have those combinations of emotions, and sometimes we have, for example, solidarity is very specific, because we have solidarity like the term that refers to that is not emotional, like concept solidarity. But solidarity can be also emotions if we attached emotions to that. So I think this is I'm thinking about methodological stuff here, like how to separate those things. For example, and I also think that collective identity is also, like I said, is a goal as much as it means. If it is goal, it is good question to think about that. Can we copy, could those emotions travel to other contexts? Can we learn something from these protests in Serbia? For example, now we have protests in Sarajevo, and those protests are very similar to this one in Serbia. And we also had protests last year in Montenegro, and they were also similar to this one in Serbia. also leads by students and young people, high school students also. So, so the question why universities and young people lead those protests, I think there is some practical, I don't have complete answer on that. I just think that from practical level, they have privilege, they have time to protest, they have time to live in those buildings without thinking about jobs, without thinking about what they're going to do tomorrow. So yeah, I don't want to underestimate the strength of the protests, but I really think that they are in some kind of privileged position to protest all day and to, for example, to just plan those actions and organize the protest. Yeah, I need to think about it. I don't have some definite answer on that.
Thanks a lot for this really nice presentation, Maria. I'm Álvaro Leart. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the ULP. I was wondering precisely on this thing that you were mentioning at the end, if you could talk a little bit more about the organizational infrastructure of the protest. So you seem to kind of put like a causality. So because the protests are triggering certain emotions, a lot of people are showing up. But I was wondering if you could also talk about, are there student unions that are strong? Are there NGOs that are also helping the students to organize? Are there other actors that are already formed before this protest emerged that also operate in some ways as the kind of organizational infrastructure for this protest to emerge? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, organizational aspect is also a different topic. So in short, yes, the organizational aspect was maybe the most important part. And this is very interesting because this is Gen Z who use social media, and they were using all those digital technology things to communicate between them, like WhatsApp group, Telegrams groups. So they had voting and organization that was happening on site at the buildings, but in parallel they had some organization going through social media. So different parallel dual mechanisms, dual tactics somehow. And of course they had those groups like group for strategy, group for media, group for safety, different groups at every faculty. And those groups, like working groups, they were similar between universities and faculties, but some faculties had some specific groups. Yeah, I can't remember which one, but so the organization was very strong, was very good. So that was the reason why this protests and mass movement is at the end, I think, very successful.
Hi, Maria. Thank you very much for the encyclopedic overview of all the stages of the protest. I think that was, in addition to the rest of the presentation, I found that very good. I also really appreciated, and something that resonated with me was the expose that you made about the fact that you no longer had the luxury, especially because you come from the from the faculty, which was literally on fire in the image, that you did not have the luxury to work calmly in an office. And I think many of us could use that as well. My question is a little more on the political context of the protests, because I don't work on emotions, but I'm interested in the wider political context in which these protests have emerged, and what do they mean about contemporary Serbia, and especially about the contemporary Serbian subject, if we're talking about the students or the Gen Zs, as you said. Because as I was listening to you talk about emotions, I also felt like I was constantly thinking about oblivion, denial, about certain things, about certain topics, erasure of certain topics, that can also very well cohabitate with notions of solidarity, rage, and I use that as a as a triggering thought to think also about a question that I promise you will come in a second. Just let me elaborate this. There is this methodological choice. I mean, the student protests have been historically validated as something that have the propensity to generate greater goods. And because they are usually associated with the youth, and youth per definition is again, has the propensity to generate progress, right? And granted, you pointed out that there is a lot going on in these protests. So I think unpacking a little bit youth and what youth can do, and what potential does the youth have to actually inseminate change. I wanted to ask you, what is, based on the interviews and also in your day-to-day work, what is the contemporary Serbian youth today, like in the political context where Serbia and Europe is at the moment? What is the contemporary Serbian Gen Z? Because and we have talked about this in another moment, but you also come from a generation that have done monumental protests, anti-regime protests as well in the 1990s. What's, perhaps for lack of a definition, is there a difference? Do you see a difference in between the Serbian subject of the 90s and the one that has taken the streets and has been in plenums for the past years? Thank you.
Thank you, Vjosa. It's very interesting. I think that is maybe the most important question. What can we expect from this generation, from this Gen Z? Because today, maybe we can see some progressive parts. We can see some that they're very liberal, that they're very open to others. But actually, based on that, we can't predict, does that generation is going to be like that in the future? Because they are going to shape our future. But from sociological and analytical perspective, we can't predict that. Because, for example, during 90s, we also had some political generation. And they were against Milosevic, they were progressive somehow, but at the end, like 2 decades later, they turned out like something else. Like 2 decades or 3 decades later, we have Serbian society, which is still very polarized, very conservative, homophobic, with high levels of authoritarianism, and really research shows that data. Patriarchal sexism and everything which goes to that traditional, comparing to other countries, comparing to European countries. So, so the question is now, okay, we have hope that this generation is going to be better than the previous one, but I can't say that like for sure. So today, and it is also interesting that I think they're using some, for example, national narratives. They're using, for example, national flag, but they use that flag in a different way. Not like a symbol of nationalism, like toxic nationalism or hating other groups. They use it like a symbol of also strategically to gather more people to join the protests. So that strategy may be, from their point of view, may be good strategy. You want other people to join the protests. But the question is, what is what is going to be with value orientations of those students at the end. For example, I had some subsample of LGBTIQ students who are part of this movement, and they had more critical attitudes especially towards those symbolic aspects and national flag, and especially toward religious symbols. They're very critical. They don't like it. But something, I don't know. I think that we need to do research again, maybe next year, and to see, or in a few years, and to see what our value orientations of these students actually are. What they are going to become after this. So now we can be optimistic, but for 5 or 10 years, I can't predict. From sociological point of view, I can't predict that. So, but it is, I think, maybe crucial question for our future and for them as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Marija, for the presentation. My name is Marco. I wanted to ask you about if you've seen or if you've heard from the students something about the transnational aspect of the protests, because I was here in Brussels last year in May when some students came here to
cycling.
Cycling, and also for the marathon. And I had a chance to talk with one of them, and it surprised me how there was this double attempt on one hand to gain visibility in the European Union, but on the other also they really did not want to talk about stuff, political stuff that was affecting Serbia in the European context. For example, the lithium deal with the Commission, because they were afraid that this would deviate the attention from essentially their goals. So I wanted to ask if you've heard some, or what was the perspective on the transnational aspect, or rather the European perspective from the students?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that is also interesting aspect of the research, because we asked them about their attitudes toward European Union and European Commission and what they're expecting from them. And okay, we had different answers, but I can't generalize. Yeah, I can't give you some final answer on that. I think that is maybe more for discussion. I think that some of them are more skeptic, and they don't expect European Union to do something about regime, to help them. I think that most of them, students, believe that this is our inner problem, that we need to solve this. But of course, they were cycling to Strasbourg, and they wanted to show the world what's going on in Serbia. So they have some hope. That was also strategy, of course. But I think they had some hope that maybe European Parliament is going to do something, and especially because we are expecting next elections, and those elections are not going to be regular. So we are expecting that we are going to have another wave of protests, another battle for fair elections in Serbia. So regular elections are going to be next year, but we are expecting to have early elections maybe this year. I don't know. I think that they had mixed feelings and mixed attitudes towards transnational aspect.
I just have one tiny question and then another question. The first question is regarding the age group of the older population that you mentioned, the elderly people that were, older people that were featured in the students' kind of movement, and how they showed then the second, about them, I want to know about approximate age group, maybe, for the older people, and then the second would be about the phases and the transition between the phases that you've mentioned. So the transition to the current phase, which is the fourth phase, if I'm correct. Yes. Was that impacted by, in any chance, by fear, or was it like the declining rate of people going to protest and it not being it reaching its peak in the third phase, and then moving on to the fourth phase? What was it impacted by? Maybe if you could explore that.
Thank you. I really would like to hear your perspective and your research, because I think there are a lot of similarities between Serbia and Georgia. And that is an interesting question about older people. It just came on my mind that it would be interesting, like separate research topics, but I didn't have time to research it more. Age group, I was thinking about people, I don't know, older than 60 or 70, and those are specific people from villages, from rural areas around Serbia. And it was also interesting for me, like how that young generation connected with them. And I think it was very spontaneously also. That maybe that part wasn't strategic. I think it was like really honest reaction from students. Sorry, I forgot the.
It was just the transition.
Oh, transition. Yeah. I'm not sure. It was easier for me to describe the phases like first, second, and third one, but it was really difficult for me to describe this ongoing phase because I don't have some distance. I still don't realize what's going on now, because we are now in some kind of that prolonged frozen political conflict. And maybe it's not fear. I think that we had lots of fear in this third phase because we had lots of police violence. But on this phase, maybe people are just tired. Maybe they just don't see perspective. They're just you really get tired when you are fighting and organizing things and going on protests for the whole year or more than a year. At one point, you just get tired, and you need something else. Now that something else are elections. So I think that okay. Now I just speak from my perspective, not just. I don't want to generalize this thing. This is my perspective that, but yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know about. I can't give you some answer on that.
Thank you.
Sorry, just another thought, because as you were talking to Marko, it reminded me. You said that you have asked the students, where do they stand or what do they think about the EU or the European Commission or the deal. And I wonder in that regard, given that this is something that has been happening primarily in the urban areas, so people have congregated primarily because then, as you explained, it spills over. Have the students also been asked about other potential emotional generating aspects, Kosovo being the most obvious one? Or Sanjak, perhaps, because there was also some symbolic interaction with Sanjak, and also not so symbolic interaction with Kosovo. It's just the usual bigotry that also has featured, unfortunately, in the protests as well. Yeah,
I think that it is also interesting question, and we really had a lot of debate about those questions, especially Sanjak, because we had students from Novi Pazar, and they're very active, and they were guests at our Faculty of Philosophy, so they're like students from other universities really like students from Novi Pazar, so they're very connected, and there is very there are a lot of support connected with different ethnic and religious sentiments between them, and that is I don't question that part. So, but the Kosovo is different, because we didn't ask them directly about Kosovo, but we can cover that topic if we analyze promo videos, promo materials from Instagram posts about Kosovo, and their attitude. Maybe I shouldn't say it like this, but I don't like their attitude toward Kosovo because they're treating Kosovo like the part of Serbia. So they're not questioning so much that part. But they're not going deeper in political and historical context of the Kosovo. So, for example, they support Palestine, they support Gaza. That is not problem, like you mentioned somewhere. But I think that they have their generation born after those events in history, and they don't feel like they're responsible for that. And maybe this is just my interpretation. So. Maybe this is not like, I'm not speaking now like I'm a researcher, maybe more like activist, but I don't see in those attitudes or promo materials some hate. It's not hate. Specifically, it's not hate based on ethnical level, but I have problem with that they don't maybe. Questioning like I said, that historic aspect of the Kosovo and the whole story, because they critic regime because they don't take accountability because of the corruption, but they don't critic regime because of the past, and I think that is problematic part. Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. It was really fascinating. I'm going to try to stay very concise. I'm going to try. I conducted my PhD in social psychology, and now I'm doing political science, so I guess that kind of makes me political psychologist. And I did my PhD on conflicts within social movements, so it's really, really interesting, even though you're not talking specifically about conflicts. So I guess that leads me to my first question. Did you notice any tensions within the movement? Because it's in my mind, this whole movement was represented as like very homogeneous, which maybe it is, I don't know. So I guess that my first question is, were there any tensions? I don't like to talk about conflicts because it kind of puts a negative light on something that's quite normal in my opinion. So that's my first not concise at all question. And then it's more about literature in social psychology about all those emotions. And as you mentioned, there's very interesting literature that can maybe help you make sense of all the, in my opinion, very nice intuition that you have between like emotions and how you construct a collective identity, how you make sense of emotion, how you put them into action and stuff. So I'm very happy to discuss that with you after. So yeah, I guess my question is just about the tensions within.
Okay. Now, thank you a lot. Yeah, it's very. It's also one interesting perspective because I just realized I didn't put subcodes for negative emotions for some reason. I forgot. But yeah, the negative emotions was the most dominant group in emotion groups. So negative emotions were connected specifically with frustration and tensions and anxiety. So those code frustration, I was coded and material attitudes and statements connected with inner conflicts. So yeah, there were a lot of inner conflicts in the student movement. So conflicts about organization, conflicts about ideology, conflicts about between faculties at the same city, or between universities, between on a different level. You can just see that there are a lot of conflicts, and they also talked about strategies to regulate those emotions. When someone really frustrating you because he or she doesn't, maybe more he doesn't clean the bathroom or something in the faculty, how you regulate yourself. Yeah, I think that is very important aspect, and I hope that someone is going to research that topic deeply, more deep. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. My name is Katarina. You were speaking about police violence. I was wondering whether these protests have affected the feeling towards police. Was police always seen as something brutal, or did the protest affect that even more?
Thank you. The police was, I think, all the time brutal, according to those interviews. Students, yeah, they had a lot of anger because, and especially toward police, when maybe some of them had some hope that police is going to be nice to them, but after 1 year of protesting and being on the streets, you just realize that is illusion. So maybe at the beginning of the protest, I remember that some citizens were bringing the flowers to police, just wanting them to be nice or to join them. But yeah, at the end of the year, I think, yeah, it was totally different emotion toward the police. I can't use some other words to describe those feelings, but you can imagine.
Thank you, and congratulations for your nice talk. So I've studied also social movements, student movements in Dakar and Francophone Africa in 1968 and so on. And I'm very interested in the study of emotions, the building of emotions. So I myself did not focus on that movement. And I saw here a group you mentioned, and you did not talk a lot about the one you called the students who wants to study.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of a group linked to the support of the government or something like an anti-movement. So I want to know how important they were and what was the impact in the movement.
So, thank you, Omar, for the question. During the, I think it was phase 3, yeah, in central Belgrade, we had that camp known as Chatsiland. So it's a play on words in Serbian. I can't translate it directly, sorry. But that camp was established after March 15. And it was camp with tents, police forces, and regime-aligned thugs in front of the parliament. And the camp was primarily organized by supporters of Serbian Progressive Party and with some students who want to study. And those students were also a really interesting part of this protest because at the beginning, at those camps, there were maybe some students, but the end of because camp was active more than 6 months. And by the end of the year, the camp was really full of some criminals, thugs, and people who were attacking citizens. So actually, there were not students, but some other groups connected. But at the end, they call them like, we are students who want to study. And yeah. That's a short description of that. I don't want to go in details.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm Luca, and I wanted to ask about the emotions of feeling like the connectedness with others. And I was wondering if you think, so you mentioned a lot like how much it was a really important aspect of the protest that the students felt connected to each other, also with the elderly people. Do you think these collective emotions were mainly important in mobilizing such a big group of people, and it was more about like how long this protest persisted, or like so? I'm not sure if I'm clear.
Yeah, I understand. I think, it was mobilization because they mobilized lots of people at the beginning of the protest. They didn't have it was maybe more problem how to continue with mobilization, and I think that the largest protest was at the beginning, in January, February, and March. And after that, they were debating about strategies how to mobilize citizens to continue with that. So, thank you.
Are there any more questions? Otherwise, we can wrap it up. Thank you very much, Marija, for the very nice presentation, and thank you to participants for the very engaging discussions.
Thank you all for the
we can
questions.
follow with a drink, an informal drink to continue discussing. Thank you.